All right, welcome to our civility session today with the League of Women Voters of Michigan. And before we begin, I'd love to invite Denise to say a few words to kick us off, and then we will watch a little quick video and get started with our program. So Denise, would you like to do an intro from the League of Women Voters?
Sure. Thanks, Lynn. We're so excited that everyone's here. This is the first in our series of 3 spring workshops that are all virtual. And Paula Bowman and I are so happy that you've all chosen to join us for this, what I think will prove to be a very interesting session. So thank you, Lynn. Take it away.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it. So I'm going to ask everybody to mute your microphones, please. If you have questions as we go along, please put them in the chat. I will weave them into the program, and we will at the end have a little time for Q&A as well. So first, I'd like to share my screen and show you just a quick little video about the Civility Project to give you a sense of what we are, and then we will jump into the program.
There's been so much over the last couple of years, this notion that we can't talk to each other. I believe we can talk to each other.
I'm the first person to say, this is not easy.
Look at the way our media has become bunkered on the cable news channels and on the internet. You have all conservative, all liberal. They don't talk across lines, they fight.
And I say, well, this is somehow
You
inappropriate.
can't shut down thoughts.
It's not about
Oh,
shutting down
hang on,
thoughts.
hang on. She's not saying shut down. She said
That's not what it's called. She's saying,
Sure, has it?
It's President Trump. I think it's the environment has become toxic, and if you're not on the attack, you get eaten.
Why don't you turn it up a little bit?
When they sat down together and talked about the work they did to have a friendship, I'm like,
both of us have been made better in the work that we do by the relationship we've been able to build with, it's tense at times. Sometimes it is uncivil. You see it on TV.
Even among political commentators, if you will, and opinion journalists, there isn't that much interaction today. There's not that comfort level for people to have good, healthy debates and discussions.
The sort of key word for this project is the ability to sit and listen to somebody else, listen to someone else's story, and listen in a way that really respects what they're saying, as opposed to anticipating what you might say in response.
All right, so that's our little sizzle reel to give you a sense of what it is that we're doing here. But let's just jump in. I'd like to introduce Stephen Henderson and Nolan Finley so that they can each do a little intro about who you are and how the Civility Project came to be. Who wants to kick us off? Stephen,
Sure.
Nolan?
You want me to start, Nolan?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Where's Nolan? I don't even see Nolan. Oh wait, there he is. Okay. So thanks first of all for having us. We're always excited to talk to different groups of voters and thinkers in our community about civility, which I think both Nolan and I would say is becoming a rare commodity, too rare in our politics and our culture. And we're in the middle of an election year where I think we are introduced every day to a different example of how uncivil our politics have become. And look, it's March. We got till November. It's going to get worse. The easiest way, I think, to understand the Civility Project is as an effort by me and by Nolan to share some of the things that we have learned and experienced over the past 17 years, really, of us, working together and really becoming friends. Nolan and I met in 2007 when I moved back to Michigan. I'm a Detroit, Michigan native, but was for a long time working away at newspapers around the country. I came home in 2007 to be the editorial page editor of the Detroit Free Press. Nolan was already, and had been for several years, I think almost a decade at that point, the editorial page editor of the Detroit News. And if you know anything about Detroit newspapers, you know that the Free Press is the liberal newspaper here, and the News is the conservative newspaper, and that's nowhere more evident than on the editorial pages of the two newspapers. It didn't take long when I got back to Detroit for people to kind of notice that the Free Press had this Black liberal editorial page editor, and the News had this white conservative editorial page editor, and I think people quickly said, look, I bet if we put these two together, they'll fight. And they were right. We did. They put us on television and on radio and on stage together, and it didn't matter what issue you asked us about. We could find a reason to disagree about it, and a way to disagree about it. And we got very good at that. And in fact, we're still very good at that. I mean, there are things that if you bring them up in this conversation, we'll have an argument about it. But something else started to happen too, as we started to get more of these invites and spend more time doing these things together. We started to talk about things other than politics. We started to get to know each other, and to realize that when we weren't arguing about the way we saw the world, we actually kind of liked each other. We had things in common that I think neither one of us maybe would have predicted, given our backgrounds and experiences. And this was a great shock to us, but also to people around us. I think both of us can tell very funny stories about people we know who've kind of pulled us aside from time to time and said, are you really friends with that Nolan Finley guy? Like, do you really like him? How do you even put up with it? I know that people have said the same thing to Nolan. But it was true that we were quickly finding a way to have really spirited and sometimes even angry disagreements about policy or politics or culture or what have you. But then, go off and have dinner together or have drinks or hang out and do things. I mean, for us, that just seemed like kind of a natural space to inhabit. And if you think back to what was going on in 2007 and 2008 when we were doing this, we're in a kind of a similar time frame. There was an election that was happening, and the country was really pretty deeply divided about about the election itself and the outcome of that election. Some people were really happy that Barack Obama was elected. Other people were very upset. But if you think about the reaction to that election, and then fast forward 8 years to 2016, and think about the reaction to the election where Donald Trump was elected president, things got markedly worse. The absolute depression and anger and bitterness that I think came out of the 2016 election didn't look anything like what it looked like in 2008. And if you fast forward from 2016 to now, another 8 years, is it any better? I think it might be worse in some ways. And so about 6 or 7 years ago, Nolan and I started really kind of thinking about what was happening around us, and in our politics, people not being able to figure out how to manage differences. But at the same time, we were becoming better friends. I mean, nothing happened to our personal relationship as our politics got much worse. And so we started to think about, well, what's the reason for that? Like, what are we doing that seems elusive for lots of other people? What are we doing that seems to kind of miss lots of other people and lots of other relationships? And so we started to talk about it and identify things that that we were experiencing and things that we had kind of agreed to do that made it possible to have disagreements and arguments, but not have it be the reason that we couldn't get along. And so that's where the Civility Project kind of comes from. We started by just kind of getting our friends together with each other, like over bourbon, of course, which was one of the things that Nolan and I have always had in common, is an affinity for bourbon. But we used to, invite his friends and my friends to come drink with us in a bar in Detroit and sit around and just talk to each other, not talk about politics, not talk about things we disagreed about, but get to know each other, and just kind of see that even though people have different ideas about politics and things like that, that doesn't mean that they can't be friends. It doesn't mean they can't be social. And from there, we've grown it to this presentation that we make, where we talk about specifically the kinds of things that we do and have done over the 17 years that have made this possible, and hope to give those things to other people. I mean, we're really in a space now where we're in a desperate space, I think is an accurate way to describe it in terms of our politics. People can't manage differences in the way that they used to be able to. They either avoid those differences altogether, don't talk about politics with people who they disagree with, or when they do, the results are catastrophic. And again, we're seeing that play out every day, I think, in this election, and it's only going to get more intense as we get closer. So what we'll do today is we'll talk about some of the rules and the customs that Nolan and I have developed over that 17 years to be able to do this, and hope to have you leave with an idea that this is possible. And it's not easy, but it is something that I think all of us can manage and do if we can commit to some civil ground rules when we're dealing with people who think differently than we do.
Well, thanks, Steve. I think that's an excellent summation of what we're trying to do here. There is tremendous momentum in this country toward hate, and it's not. We've lost this sense of responsibility to work together and to work through our differences, and instead of trying to collegially solve problems and come up with solutions, our motivation now is increasingly to destroy the people who disagree with us, and to prevail that way. This all or nothing, we're going to win and you're going to lose. That attitude is what's prevalent here. And we don't understand each other. We don't trust each other. And this project takes its inspiration from the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, and I'll paraphrase. We fear each other because we don't know each other. We don't know each other because we don't talk to each other. And what we're trying to do here is get people to talk to each other. This is not a kumbaya class. We're not thinking it's at all possible that we'll bring everybody to the same point, thinking the same way, agreeing on everything. And we're not even sure that's a healthy place to be, but we want them at least, we want people to at least get to the point where they can look at the people on the other side of the political divide and see human beings and see something of value. rather than just see somebody who presents a threat to them or stands in the way of them getting what they want. We're trying to encourage and teach people to get to know each other and talk to each other. You can continue to disagree, but it's not okay to hate the people you disagree with. And so we've come up with a few, principles of how to do this, because we're always asked, how do you do it? How does this work? What do you have to, what do you have to do to live a civil life in a world that is so uncivil? And so we have a few things that we'll go over with you today that we hope will help you get to the place where you can, approach somebody who has views that may be aberrant to you without losing your mind and your temper and going nuts, if you will. So, Steve, why don't you walk through those initial points, and then we'll take them one at a time.
Yeah. So, like Nolan said, the first question we get asked all the time is, okay, well, that sounds great, but how do you do that? How do you do that at a time when people are so deeply divided, and when so many people are, or seem at least, really dedicated to that divide, right? It's not just that people think differently. It's that they're committed to the idea that they think differently from other people, and that means they can't interact with people who don't agree with them. And so when we think about the things that we've been able to do over the last 17 years, there are kind of four pillars that I think have developed between the two of us that keep us from having interactions that damage the relationship, even when we're having arguments about politics or something like that. The first one is dropping assumptions. I think it's really common right now, and maybe more common than at most points in American history, that when we meet somebody and learn that they are from a different place from we are, maybe think differently than we do, or vote differently than we do, we make a ton of assumptions about who those people are and why that's true. That I think lead us automatically to this space of opposition, to say, well, that person is these things because they are this thing, and that makes this impossible for me to reach that person or to connect with that person. We ask you to not do that, and we'll talk about ways that that's possible, and some of the guideposts you need to look out for to avoid making big assumptions about people and acting on those assumptions. We also, the second pillar that we talk about is setting reasonable expectations. When you are talking with somebody who sees the world differently than you, with whom you have great disagreements, I think you got to set up a reasonable number of expectations for the conversation. Those expectations don't include, I'm going to embarrass this person. I'm going to show this person how stupid they are. I'm going to show this person how wrong they are. Or even, I'm going to convince this person that they should think like me. Those are, I think, unreasonable expectations for these interactions. And we'll talk about what we instead try to get out of talking to each other and with other people with whom we disagree. Our third pillar is about listening, that once you drop assumptions and set reasonable expectations for these interactions, you actually got to listen to the person that you're talking to. And we think of that word a little differently in the Civility Project than I think many of us do in our personal lives. And we'll talk about the different ways that we want to define listening and check for it in these conversations. And then the fourth pillar is a commitment that I think that we have made and that we think more people need to be able to make, to the idea of sticking in these oppositional kinds of relationships. Nolan and I have been doing this for 17 years, arguing for 17 years. We've been friends for 17 years. I don't think either of us has ever gotten up from an argument and said, you know, that's it. I am done with this guy. I am not coming back to do this again, even though sometimes we're mad when we're done arguing. Sometimes there's bitter feelings. We always come back. And there's something to that commitment, that active commitment that I think helps define civility and helps protect the idea of civility. So Nolan, why don't you start with dropping assumptions?
Yeah, we have a guiding principle at the Civility Project that is all good people come to their viewpoints in the same way, through the same process. They take the information, the data available, they run it through the filters of their own experiences and personal values, and they come up with a viewpoint. They come up with an opinion. If it's different than yours, it doesn't make them stupid or evil, uninformed. It just means they've lived a different life. They've had different experiences. They hold different values. The first step in achieving a civil relationship with people on the other side, if you will, is to understand what those experiences and values are. And so we generally put people together, either in small groups or one-on-one, and ask them to talk to each other, not about politics itself, not about policy in today's world, but where they come from, what makes them a conservative or a moderate or a progressive. What were their experiences? What are the values? Why do they believe the things they do? And what in their life shape those beliefs? And we find that once you have those conversations, once you approach another person without assumptions, because we all do that. We hear somebody say, "Oh gosh, I'm a Trump voter, or I'm a Biden voter, or I'm a Green Party voter," and we make assumptions in our heads about why they are voting the way they are and who they are as a person. And we find that that's not the things we assume about another person. Not always true. That's not always the reality. And so we ask people to fill in these information gaps as a first step towards having a productive conversation. And oftentimes, even with people who are very close in our lives, we don't take that step of asking them why. We might argue, we might get our feelings hurt, we might sort of isolate from other people, but we don't get around to asking, why do you think that way? What is it in your life that makes this viewpoint right for you? And so, we ask people to do that exercise and to have those conversations. Steve and I did it ourselves well into our friendship through a program called StoryCorps. And it really changed the way we interact with each other and the way that we talk to each other. And Steve, you can briefly just tell them about that StoryCorps experience.
Yeah.
I put it in the chat, you guys. So it's
there's a link to the chat.
Yeah.
There's a link to the podcast in the chat. So StoryCorps, for those who don't know, is an NPR program that travels the country and collects really American stories about relationships. They have a little Winnebago they cart around, and when they come to your town, you can go down and bring somebody close to you and have a conversation about the relationship that you have with that person and why it's important and the history and things like that. Most people choose a spouse or a family member when they do that. I remember when I heard that NPR was coming to Detroit, I thought, you know what, I'm going to take Nolan down with me to StoryCorps. And I told him on the way that we weren't going to go in there and do what we normally do, which is have an argument about politics. We were going to go in there and tell each other our stories. And by the time we did this, we've been working together and have been friends for almost a decade. So we knew each other pretty well. But I said, you know, I want us to actually explain to the other why we say the things that we do, why we believe the things that we do, and where all of that comes from. So we did. We went into this little camper and sat across the table with a microphone between us. And first, Nolan told me about what made him a conservative. And then I told him about what made me a progressive or a liberal or whatever label you want to put on it. And a couple of really important things happened in that conversation, even though we'd known each other for 10 years. Number one, we both heard things from the other that we had not heard before, experiences, thinking, rationale, the kind of things that really help explain why somebody might believe one thing and why that might be different from what you believe. The other thing that happened was I think we both were able to identify commonalities that we had, you know, despite the fact that we think really differently and see the world really differently. There were things that we shared that I don't think we had been able to identify before or articulate. And then the third thing that really happened, I think, is that after that, you know, there was an understanding and a respect that went beyond what we already had for one another. I mean, really understanding where someone comes from and where their beliefs come from leads you to a very different space in the way you think of them and in the way you interact with them. And I say all the time that if you were to go back and look at you know, video of us arguing before we did this StoryCorps exercise and look at video after, I think you'd see a difference. You wouldn't see a difference in what we're saying or how committed we are to what we believe, but you would see a difference in the way that we are interacting with each other. And there is a deeper respect, I think, for all of the things that both of us believe because we had that experience. And that's why we kind of start there with people sessions. Imagine how different the last 17 years might have gone if we had started, if Noel and I had done that first, instead of going and arguing, if we'd really gotten to know each other and why we believe what we believe before we did that, I think, you know, it just would have looked different. It would have looked really different.
And respect, I think, is the key word, Steve. And, you know, we walked away with that knowledge and that respect. And up until that point, you know, I was convinced somebody dropped Steve on his head when he was a baby. But after I heard his story and after I heard his experiences and his family experiences and talking about the place he came from, it made sense to me. I couldn't imagine him with those experiences and being anything other than what he was politically. It simply wouldn't make sense for him. And I think that was the likewise piece for him. I mean, we had the, you know, we stopped making assumptions because we had the knowledge to fill in the gaps. And so we had much more productive conversations. And so, you know, after people get to that point of knowledge, if you will, about one another. And, you know, it's fun to watch these sessions when we do put people together. I mean, we had in one of our earliest sessions, one of our earliest exercises, two suburban women, very similar, you know, lived in the same neighborhood. They walked with each other every day for 9 years, and they were scared to death to talk politics on these walks or talk about the political environment or what have you, because they knew one was a Democrat, one was a Republican. That's all they do. They didn't know the why of it, but they were afraid that difference would be, would ruin their ability to have these pleasant morning walks that they have together. And so once we sat them across from each other and asked them to talk about who they were and why, it sort of was a light bulb for them. They come to understand why one voted the way they did and why the other a different way. And it opened up their relationship. It took that eggshell element out of their relationship. And we first embraced this idea many years ago when we were both up on Mackinac Island for the Republican Party's biannual leadership conference. Everybody on the island except Steve was a conservative Republican, and you can imagine, not so pleasant for him. But anyway, we were both up there covering it, and for our different papers. And at the end of the day, we said, "Hey, let's go downtown Mackinac, and have a drink." So we walked down there, found a bar. All the bars were crowded, of course, and we sat together at the bar, and we're enjoying it, a drink. And I had to get up and use the restroom, so I got up and I walked across the room. And halfway across the room, these two women jumped me. It doesn't happen to me often in a bar, but this night it did. These two women jumped me, and I knew them. They were two conservative women who ran a website that was very much dedicated to saying nasty things about Barack Obama. And so they grabbed me on my way across there and they said, "Is that Steve Henderson you're sitting with, talking to?" I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Is he your friend?" I said, "Well, yes." And they said, "Oh, how could that be? We just hate him. He is so awful." And the passion they spoke, those words, "we just hate him," really hit me kind of hard, because I thought, and I asked them, I think the salient question was, "You hate him? Do you know him?" And they said, "No, we've never met. I said, "You've never talked to him?" No. I said, "Well, my seat's open. He's not busy. Go over there if you would and just talk to him for a little while." And they did, to their credit. And it was about an hour and a half later, I finally walked and pulled them away from Steve. And it was not that they were in a confrontational mode. They were having, what I would say was a productive conversation. And as we walked away, I said, "Well, what do you think?" And they said, "Oh, he's so wonderful. We just love him." Now, 90 minutes, they went from "we just hate him" to "we just love him." Nothing about Steve had changed. Nothing about them had changed. They hadn't changed each other in any way. What had happened is they took the time to get to know each other, and that sort of sparked in our mind the possibilities here of the Civility Project. And so, that's the importance, we believe, of dropping assumptions. Now, after you've done that, and after you've actually sat down, all of a sudden it's not, "Oh my gosh, now it's going to be so easy, we can talk to each other." Not necessarily. I mean, you've got to set honest goals for a conversation. And we say at the Civility Project that a conversation is not a competition. If you're sitting down across from another person with the object of winning a debate, winning an argument, converting that person to your views, forget about it. It's not going to happen. That's not a productive way to go into a conversation. I have been telling Steve the truth for 17 years now, and he still hasn't come to the light, and he never will. And if he did, I'd probably fall over dead. It's just not going to happen. People hold their views oftentimes, or most of the times, fairly with a lot of commitment. And you're not going to change them in a single conversation, and maybe not in a series of them. And that shouldn't be your objective to convert, to change. You're out there, an honest goal for a conversation is learning from one another, broadening your own base of knowledge by talking to that person or testing your own opinions against that person. And, you know, like I said, Steve and I, we don't change each other, we don't convert each other, but we do find value in testing our ideas against each other, in sharpening our arguments, in being open to something we might not have thought about, you know, that might sort of take us in a somewhat different direction or give us a broader perspective. There's finding value in the conversation, in the exchange of ideas. That's an honest goal. Winning is not an honest goal, and nobody enjoys that sort of conversation where it's, oh, you blah, blah, blah. Nobody likes that. And if you watch our political conversations today at every level, it's the combat that is the most prevalent thing. It's the headbutting, not the, you know, sort of testing of ideas and the back and forth querying of one another with the idea of gaining greater knowledge. And so, you know, set those goals going in and set those ground rules going in. Don't, you know, everybody's got to be comfortable that there's no gotcha element to this, that if somebody says the wrong thing by mistake, they're not going to end up out on the street, you know, with a can around their neck. People have to be comfortable. They have to trust that this is an environment where you can exchange ideas. And, you know, if somebody needs gently correcting, you know, that's fine. But this, I can't believe you said that. I mean, you're going to shut down the conversation. And, you know, our goal is to keep you talking. And, you know, that should be your goal as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the first
We have a
place
question.
too that social media enters the conversation, because so much of the culture of expectations in conversation is now set by people's behavior on social media. And if you think of the way people interact there, so much of it is about winning. So much of it is about humiliating the person that you're talking with or arguing with, or showing them to be, quote, a fool, or something like that. And you know, one thing Nolan and I actually disagree on pretty strongly is social media and its value. And we'll talk a little later about that disagreement. But the thing that we do agree on is that the culture of social media right now is not helpful for what we're talking about, which is civil discussion and exchange. It teaches us all the wrong things about how to interact with people, and it makes it impossible. It makes it absolutely impossible to do the kind of learning or understanding that we've really come to value. I quote all the time the exit that Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's a really brilliant writer and thinker, who left social media about 5 or 6 years ago, and said that there was no room for him to test any ideas out on social media. That the expectation when he spoke was that he had a fully formed thought and had vetted it and could defend it. And there was no room for, hey, I'm just thinking about this and I want to talk about it. I want to have an argument about it and an exchange, but I don't want to be, you know, told that I'm stupid or crazy for thinking it. No, we're not saying that you have to walk away from social media the way he did, but I do think you have to walk away from the norms of social media to do this. You have to understand the difference, I think, between communication there and on those platforms and what we're trying to do in the Civility Project. So once you drop assumptions and set reasonable expectations and you're ready to actually talk with somebody who you might disagree with, we talk about the act of listening and how important that listening is in that exchange. You really do need to listen to what the other person is saying, and listen for understanding. Right? You're trying to figure out what they're trying to say, but so often I think, and I'm guilty of this too, in our regular lives, when we're listening to somebody, we're not really doing that. I think a lot of us would define listening as not talking, right? If I'm being quiet um, uh, uh, and letting somebody else talk, if I'm letting Nolan talk, that means I'm listening. But if I'm honest, sometimes when Nolan's talking, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking about, well, as soon as he's done, here's what I'm going to say. As soon as he stops talking, here's my next point. Or I'm judging what he's saying as he's saying it. Or I'm frustrated because what he's saying doesn't reflect, the sensibility of what I just said to him before he started talking. I'm distracted. I'm in another space, in other words. And I think we all do that, and we all recognize ourselves doing that. What we're encouraging in the Civility Project is, again, to kind of walk away from that and to invest a little more in the other person and their ideas, and invest in the idea that there is something to be learned from understanding more about what they have to say and why they believe it. And so I have a couple of tests for myself to check whether I'm actually listening in a conversation. The first is, after Nolan is done talking, could I, if I was asked, could I repeat back what he said as if I were him? Could I essentially become Nolan for 5 minutes, God forbid, and say some of the crazy things he says in these arguments, and do it not in a mocking way, right? Do it in a very sincere way that shows that even if I disagree, even if I think what he said was outrageous, that I really did take in the substance of what he was trying to communicate, and that I really did understand where he was coming from. It's a lot harder than it even sounds to be able to listen that intently to someone, and listen with the idea of being able to repeat it back. And then the second test I have for myself is whether I have questions for that person. I find that when I'm really listening to somebody, when I'm really invested in what they're saying, my reaction to them is not to answer with my own sort of declaration of belief. It really is to ask them more about what they're saying. Maybe they said something that I didn't quite catch all of. Maybe they said something that surprised me, and I want to know more about it. There is, for me, part of listening is, again, reflecting back that you did listen, that you are invested in what the other person is saying. And, the interrogative form of our language, English, communicates that so much better and so much more effectively than the declarative form. If you answer somebody with your own statement, as opposed to an inquiry into more of what they're saying, you shut the conversation down. And so encouraging that exchange through questioning, I think, is a key part of showing that you're listening, but it's also a key part of the listening itself.
Yeah, the only thing I would add here is, leave your condescension at the door, check your smugness. John Dingle used to say, everybody thinks they're the only person who talks to God. Understand that the person you're sitting across from believes their ideas are the right ideas, and you're the one who is crazy. So, check that smugness. Ask, as Steve said, interact, ask questions, find out the why of things while you're listening. And final pillar, Steve.
The final pillar is making the commitment to stay in the conversation and the argument. And here we don't mean, stay past the point of productivity in any given exchange. I mean, there's times when Nolan and I are talking about something or arguing about something, and you reach a point where there's just no useful point in going on, right? We've said what we have to say. We are as far apart as you could be. When you got to say, well, okay, that's the way that has to kind of end. But as I said earlier, when that happens, neither one of us has ever gotten up from a conversation like that and said that we wouldn't be back, that we wouldn't return to have, maybe even the same conversation again and see if we can get a little further. The idea of making that commitment is part of what's missing right now from civil discourse in our country. So let's go back to 2016 and the presidential election. And in this country, presidential elections are always just a few weeks before, the holidays start with Thanksgiving. I cannot think of another year in which I heard from more people in that little window of time about how they were not going to Thanksgiving dinner that year because Uncle Joe or so-and-so was going to be there and they voted for the other person, and I cannot deal with it. I don't want to have that conversation. I don't want to have that argument. And it made me very anxious about the extent to which our politics seem to be infecting interpersonal relationships in a way that I had not seen in a widespread manner before. It's 2024. I feel like that dynamic is worse now. We are pulling away in some cases from our families because of the political beliefs that they hold and our inability to kind of reconcile that with the relationship. The commitment to say, I don't like this. I don't like what this person is doing or saying or communicating to me, but I still value the relationship that we have. And that means I've got to find a way to maintain both of those. Is a very critical, active way of embracing civility. I have, against all odds, I have an aunt and uncle who sit around all day watching Fox News and listening to conservative radio. And then they'd spend all night sending me text messages and emails about all the stuff they learn. It drives me crazy. And I don't understand. I really don't understand where they're coming from or where they're getting the idea that these are, the right way to kind of think about things and solve problems. And for a long time, I just kind of avoided talking to them about this stuff. It's like there's just no point. But in recent years, I really made an effort to go back and say, look, you're my family. I can't get away from you, or I shouldn't. We should be able to have this conversation. We should be able to have this conversation without yelling and screaming at each other or not showing up for a holiday. The commitment that we have to each other is what matters. And these other things, they matter less. It's not that they don't matter, but they don't have the level of seriousness or importance that the relationship does. I think we have a desperate need in this country for those of us to do that, especially with our families, especially with our friends, especially with our neighborhoods and our religious communities. All of these spaces have been badly damaged by not just the division, the political division in the country, which has always existed. It's the nature of that division and the incivility that attends it is killing these institutions and these spaces for us. And that commitment to, all right, I don't like what this person's saying or doing, but I'm going to stay, is a big part of kind of turning that in a different direction.
So those are the pillars. That's, basics of this project. We've got a few minutes left, Lynn. I think we should get to questions now.
We have a question about what do you do when somebody believes inaccurate information or doesn't believe in facts? And so do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, again, I mean, I think that goes back to our comment, check your smugness at the door. You don't go in there and assuming that your facts are the absolute truth and whatever. Everybody feels like that. And what we, that's sort of the point of what we were talking about here. Ask questions. Why do you think the way you think? Where do you get that information? Listen, ask questions and listen to them in the hopes that they'll listen to you and ask some questions of you. If you go in there saying, well, I'm bringing you the truth and you won't listen, so I'm done with you, it's not going to work. And I think that's where we are in the country today. That's why we have such division, because particularly with all of the misinformation out there, all of the ways people are misleading other people, getting to the absolute facts, a very difficult thing. And that sort of certainty just rarely exists. So interact, ask the questions. That's the first step, I think.
So I actually, this is another place where Nolan and I kind of disagree. Facts are critical and important. They're important parts of communication. They're important parts of democracy. And right now, there are concerted efforts to confuse that communication and that democracy with things that are not true. Donald Trump lost the 2020 presidential election. That is a fact. There is no reasonable debate to be had about that. Now, where Nolan and I would agree is that there is no real upside to saying to somebody who believes that he won the 2020 election that, well, you're just wrong and you're stupid for believing what you believe. You're not going to get anywhere with that. And that makes also an assumption about the person who believes it, right? That may not be true. Maybe they have been someone who's been a victim of this misinformation. I think that the best way to respond to that is, again, not with kind of declarative confidence, but with inquiry. Why do you think Donald Trump won the 2020 election? Where did you get the information that tells you that he did? And why is it so important to you to continue to believe this, even though I could sit here and tell you a million reasons to present a million facts, actual facts that would show you that that's untrue? It matters in the case of a presidential election, but it matters more in some other places in our culture right now. I mean, there are some really dangerous lies being told about things that happen, about the way we conduct ourselves in this country. I mean, I think all the time about the spectacular lies that were told about the killing of George Floyd by a police officer in Minnesota. There are people who believe George Floyd deserved what he got and that he provoked the officer who killed him. Those are lies. And as long as we permit those lies to frame the conversation, we are allowing both, again, communication and our democracy to be damaged. It's just a question of how you confront those lies and how you get people to think differently about where and how they get information.
And I do think you have to ask the question, the key question is, why do you believe that? And I think you'll get some surprising, not on the Floyd thing, but on the election stuff. I mean, there's a lot of reasons people had suspicion and why they were vulnerable to these claims of a stolen election. A lot of things went on leading up to that election that people didn't fully understand, and that created this attitude that the other side, if you will, would do whatever it took to win. And so you got to talk through and just not make the assumption that, oh gosh, they're just poor rubes here. A lot of people I've heard a lot of people articulate some very good reasons, not produce any sort of evidence, but very good reasons and very strong opinions on why they thought it was possible. What else we got?
Yeah, we have a lot of good questions. I don't think we'll get to all of them, but the first one that I wanted to address is that somebody asked, how do we move this process to a wide audience in order to impact a majority of people? When folks are rejecting civility at a growing rate, it seems overwhelming.
Well, we're not out here trying to change the world. Our area of sphere of influence is here, and we talk to as many groups as we can, and there are a lot of other groups doing very similar work, which encourages us. But we don't feel we have to ourselves eat the whole elephant. I mean, we want to make a difference where we can, and I think as individuals, you can make a difference where you can by practicing civility, and hope it becomes contagious in your circle of the world. And I think we get enough small efforts, you get a movement, because people are tired of the incivility. They are tired of the anger. They're tired of the hate. We see that every time we speak. There's a real motivation to do better. And I think there's a lot of people working on this.
Yeah. Do you guys want to have any last comments before we close for today?
Just thank you. We
appreciate it.
We do think it's important to be aware that avoiding people you disagree with is not going to solve the incivility problem. Civil engagement is the only answer. And so if these pillars we've explained might help, then it's worth it for us. We do have a book coming out few months where a lot of this stuff will be in it. We'll try to send a message to your group when it's available.
Yeah.
So thank you.
I would also make a point about where to begin with all of this. It can seem overwhelming, the things that we see around us that are uncivil, but acting where you have agency is the thing that I always stress, right? Your family, your neighborhood, your religious community, other places where you belong and have the ability to kind of change the terms of engagement or framework. That's where each of us has not just an opportunity, but a responsibility, I think, to do these things differently. There are a lot of things we can't control. There are a lot of imbalances in society that we can't fix to make things more civil. But all of us belong somewhere and to some other people. And working in those spaces, I think, is the thing that we're all kind of called to right now.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for having us. And we will put this on our website. So if you want to revisit the pillars before the book comes out, I'll send the link out to everybody. And thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.